across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite. He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. That's the number to call me. Write it down. 0844 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back. Establish a clear line that is of no cost to you, and you can join the University of the Airwaves, the last free space in the mainstream media. It's George Galloway. Every Friday night from 7 p.m. only on Talk Radio.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Well, it's all over. Where's Wally? Who's Wally? Is the question now. Owen Smith, in his ill-fated charge of the Light Brigade, only gave Jeremy Corbyn an even bigger majority than the one that he already had. And that was with 240,000 people not being allowed to vote for one reason or another. Either they were suspended on increasingly ludicrous and bogus grounds, or they were even expelled, like my friend Christina in Essex, the Essex socialist, or they were gerrymandered out of the contest by a decision to have a sell-by date or a cut-off date, which rendered almost 100,000 people voteless, even though they had paid their money, hoping when a leadership contest ever came up, they'd be allowed to make their choice. But they were not. And then, of course, there was the small matter of the best part of 100,000 people who simply never received their vote as a result of, and I quote, administrative error. Well, you can make your mind up about that. My point is, 240,000, if even they broke on the same terms as those who did vote broke, Jeremy Corbyn would have won 75% of the vote to 25%. Of course, you and I both know that the great majority of those purged intended to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So as I said here last week in advance, you know they're lucky I don't do the lottery, because I'd have cleaned up long ago and I probably wouldn't be here on a Friday night. But I predicted here, didn't I, last Friday night, that if you were to add the purged in, Corbyn would have 80% of the vote, and I think that's not an overstatement. But what happens now? Do the members of Parliament who've been queuing up for microphones and television cameras to tell us that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't fit to be the leader of the opposition, are they now going into the next election telling their own electorate that he might not have been fit to be the leader of the opposition, but you should vote for him to be the Prime Minister? Some even called him a traitor. Are they now going to ask people to vote for the traitor? Well, these are some of the questions that we will be exploring, and not just tonight. I suspect this is a story that's going to run and run. Some of the coup makers may have taken a look across the abyss and decided to step back from it. Maybe they will return to the front bench of the opposition side of the House of Commons. Or maybe they won't. Maybe some of them will continue to sabotage, subvert and slander their own leader, and yet expect automatically to be the Labour candidate in their constituency when the next general election comes. Well, if that happens, then more fool their own constituency members. I'm not sure that they're right, that they're going to get away with it so easily. We'll be talking to a man who's written a book called The Candidate, The Improbable Path to Power of Jeremy Corbyn. And as he put it to me, it's easier to imagine the proverbial row of monkeys placed in front of a typewriter, coming up eventually with the complete works of Shakespeare, than to imagine what actually has happened. We'll be talking about the child sex inquiry. This disgraceful episode in which huge numbers of people came forward and accused sometimes powerful, sometimes rich and powerful people, as well as people of lesser fame, of sexually abusing them. They've been waiting for an inquiry, but this week the chief counsel to the inquiry, Ben Emerson QC, stepped down from the post of senior counsel after 2 years. He was suspended on Wednesday night amid reports he was about to resign following disagreements with chairwoman Professor Alexis J. Now, his departure was announced just hours after his junior counsel colleague, Elizabeth Prochaska, confirmed that she had also left her role. And Professor J is, of course, the fourth person to lead the investigation after Dame Lowell Goddard, Dame Fiona Woolf, and Baroness Butler Sloss. So how long is Professor Alexis J going to be in place? When are they going to get new counsel to the inquiry? When will there be justice for the people who suffered injury and are now being insulted on top of the injury? And we'll be talking about Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest of all banks, one of the mother of all banks, which is in very, very serious trouble in Germany. And, of course, that's not just of importance if you're in Germany, because this could be a cloud no bigger than a man's hand as viewed from Rosenkrommerte, can be a harbinger of great storms to come, which will affect all of us. And in the final hour, we'll be talking about Trump, about Clinton, about the debates and how that has affected the US political landscape. But I suspect that most of the calls and tweets, and remember the number, 0844 499 1000, that's the number to call. You can tweet me at George Galloway or us at Talk Radio, or both of us, preferably. I'm sure that most people are still coming to terms with the fact that a small group of people, 172 of them to be precise, turned British politics upside down by challenging their own leader and forcing an election, the second election, in just 12 months. They huffed and they puffed. Oh, how they huffed and puffed. But they didn't blow the house down. They have, however, handed the Conservatives a very substantial public opinion poll lead. Don't forget that when this coup was mounted, Jeremy Corbyn was level with the Conservatives in the national opinion polls. Now he trails very badly behind indeed. So there's a lot of catching up to do. Can Jeremy Corbyn do it? Is his brand of anti-austerity politics, of a fairer Britain, working for a fairer world, is that what people are looking for? Do they want a good, honest, unvarnished, unspun political leader? Or do they prefer the Blairs and the Camerons, polished to within an inch of their life, in which all you can see reflected is their insincerity? That's my point of view. Of course, I want to hear yours, particularly if it's different to mine. What do you think is going to happen with the coup makers? Are they going to make their peace, or are they going to go on making war? Let me know. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. So the Twitter addresses I give you again, at George Galloway or at Talk Radio. That's the fare, the bill of fare in front of us for tonight on the mother of all talk shows.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Now, the first subject this evening is what's going on at the CSA inquiry after the Senior Counsel and the Junior Counsel both stepped down this week, and we're on to our fourth. Maybe we'll have to soon be on to our fifth head of the inquiry. Let's talk to our special guest, Raymond Stevenson, from the Shirley Oaks Survivors Association, about the new resignations from the child abuse inquiry. Raymond Stevenson, thanks very much for joining us.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good, but this is not going well, is it? Tell us what's happened now.
Look, it's predictably not going well. We predicted 2 years ago that this unwielding beast would just stutter on and fade and people would resign. It was always designed to be a calamity.
You think it was designed to fail, Raymond?
Yes, it was designed to fail. And it's just, we got to start living in the real world, and the real world is not very nice. And some of the people that are implicated seem to be sitting around the table, seem to be part of the infrastructure that has set up this inquiry. So we're adamant, and we're saying this not because it's a conspiracy theory. We've spent 2 years investigating what took place at Lambeth. We've spoken to 400 children, we've spoken to whistleblowers, we've spoken to ex-police officers, we've spoken to social workers, housing officers. We know what took place, we know who was covering it up, and we know why. So when we sit back and listen to this charade go on, we say very clearly it's designed to end this way. There is a simple solution, George. If the government want to prove that they're absolutely legitimately intending to investigate what took place, let's start by just getting 6 people to head the 12 extra strands. They take 2 of the strands each of the investigations, and we run it parallel, rather than this big wielding beast that has one person who resides over everything.
And, of course, regularly moves on its musical chairs, isn't it? How is the current chair viewed by survivors, by people with a vital interest in this whole affair?
So I can tell you about Lambeth. We have already said that we are most probably going to pull out because of this new chair. And it's not about her as a person. It's about the fact that when the abuse suffered in Lambeth to the children, many of my friends, it was social workers who were part of the network of abuse. These were the very people we were running away from, and they were our judge and jury then. So when Justice Goddard left, the shock and horror when we woke up to find out that we have a social worker sitting and chairing the inquiry, it's like Groundhog Day to a 13-year-old who spent years begging the social workers to listen to what was going on. So it's insensitive to the extreme, because we sat there and we made a presentation and we said we were looking into the actions of the social services as a network, and we were questioning the Home Office's role. And we now know the Home Office is overburdened in the inquiry, and they have people on every tranche of the inquiry, and we now have a social service person who's heading the inquiry. It's just unbelievable. Now,
you mentioned these strands. You know much more about this than me, Raymond, so educate me and the wider listenership. What are the strands that the inquiry is supposed to be looking at?
I can't tell you exactly, but there are 12 strands, and they cover the armed forces, they cover the Catholic Church, they also cover Rotherham, and they cover Lambeth, which we represent. So there are 12 strands, and it's the best of the worst job. They've divided it up in 12, but it's still a beast of a job. And we always...
Well, even those 4, I mean, you gave me 4 examples there. Crikey, that's a life's work looking at all, just those 4.
Absolutely. So when Justice Goddard said she was leaving, I believe her issues were with the fact that she realised that this was not going to be a 4-year job. the way it was being designed, it would end up being 25 years, and all the rest of the perpetrators would be dead and buried long before any justice prevails. Hence the reason we're going to be releasing our report in the next 2 weeks, and it will clearly show the lines of cover-up.
Well, don't give us a preview because we're bound by various libel laws.
I won't, and I'm being very careful.
You have been exemplarily careful. I concede that right away. What should we do now, Raymond? I see in the paper today, though I didn't get a chance to read the article, I scanned it from a very reputable journalist, Simon Jenkins, writing in The Guardian, in which he said it's time to drop the inquiry. That presumably is not something that you would agree with.
Hideous idea. And you know what, and I'm being honest, I question anyone, whoever they are, who talks about dropping the inquiry. And I do question them. And some of the times when we've looked at people who've raised their head above the parapet and shouted, drop the inquiry, when we've investigated them, they were implicated. So it's not about dropping the inquiry. This country has made a promise to carry out these 12 strands of investigation, and there are thousands of people who have hedge their bets and they're finally going to get justice. So anyone who talks about that is ridiculous. And I'm saying that from a position of us saying we may pull out. There are other people who don't have the luxury of investigating what took place, who are relying on this. This should go ahead. But we could wake up tomorrow and we could have 6 separate heads looking into those individual strands, spreading it across the board like any sensible suggestion, it should have happened before, and this can run, and we can deal with this. But I can tell you what they're hiding, and I'm not going to say it on this. They're hiding the links to the establishment. So, and I'll give you one pointer. When the Home Office-led investigation or inquiry started, it was originally going to start in 1970 and wasn't going to go back any further than 1970. I tell you, the Home Office's liability loosens from 1970 onwards. So it's in someone's interest that we don't go back to past 1970, where the Home Office and those other organisations have direct liability. So it feels like clever gerrymandering at this moment in time. You choose a person to head an inquiry who's clearly connected, they get dropped down. You choose someone else who's also connected, they get dropped. You get Justice Goddard to come in, who we all have faith in, and all of a sudden she's not good enough. And then Ben Emerson, who is a very serious barrister, then somehow gets dropped again. It feels like every time we take 2 steps forward, there's 4 steps backwards. So we've asked the Home Office, and we've done it in writing, to ask what is their liability in regards to the children's homes in Lambeth. Where do they sit? And we said, as a sponsor, you should be upfront and tell us. They seem to have trouble being able to tell us what their liability is.
Just for the avoidance of doubt, you're not saying, and you would never say, and as I know him, I can certainly say, there's no way that Simon Jenkins is in any way implicated. He made a...
No, I'm just saying misguided. You cannot...
Misguided, victim, that's fine.
As a victim, and definitely Simon's just misguided, and panicked by all the choreographed disturbance that's going on.
I think they're destabilised by the fact that some very, will not mention names, please, some very high-profile cases seem to have fallen apart. Former MPs, military figures, and so on. I think they've lost their will to go on with this in the light of that.
You know what? You can wear people down. When we started our Lambeth investigation, we were told the police have already done an investigation. They did a joint investigation with Lambeth Council, and there was nothing to discover. Well, we've gone on record and saying we've discovered 60 paedophiles that worked in Shirley Oaks Children's Home when there was 1 conviction. So we know what it's like. If we did not investigate it ourselves, get the paperwork, find the paper trails, interview people, we would have come to the same conclusion that those prominent people that we'd identified were not, we couldn't prove. But actually, we can prove it. So you have to question the motive of the people who investigate them.
Of course, I understand that entirely. I myself as a very young child, was a victim of this kind of thing at the hands of a person in a position of trust. He was my school janitor. He was the commanding officer of the Army Cadet Force. He strutted around in a general's uniform. And I can assure you he was a real wrong-un. Now, if I'd spoken up, so I'm talking about 1965, maybe, probably 65, if I'd spoken up then and said, you see that general there? He's a paedophile and he is sexually assaulting and abusing young kids, and I'm one of them, nobody would have believed me. Absolutely nobody would have believed me.
I think you're right. But we've got a particular problem. So we're not now even thinking about the perpetrators. We're thinking, who covered it up in 1960? Who inherited that cover-up? Who then covered it up at the... And it's more about not running away from the paedophiles. It's people who know they covered it up, or they shoved the documents back under the table which they inherited. We know that because we see the paper trail. Every police officer that was part of the following investigations decided, because their own officers were implicated, it was too hot to handle. So we're not going to mention any names, but we have the name of those officers. So you can see the paper trail. One commanding officer shouted out recently, 3 weeks ago, that they should cut all the investigations into historical abuse. When we look back, he headed the investigations that let the people down so badly. So he had a vested interest in not going back and looking at his shoddy work. So
Raymond, I've got to stop, not because of what you're saying, but because of the hour, because I need to go to a break. But you're a very persuasive and powerful advocate, and I wish you all the best, whatever it is that you decide to do, whether to stay with the abuse inquiry or to branch out and publish and be damned or otherwise. Raymond Stevenson of the Shirley Oaks Survivors Association on the very vexed and vexatious issue of child sexual abuse. This is the mother of all talk shows.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
So we will. 0844 499 1000. We're talking about the child abuse inquiry and the scandal of the continued tumble of heads and resignations of council that have apparently plagued this entire affair right from the very beginning. We're talking about Jeremy Corbyn, the purge of almost 250,000 people, on top of those who actually voted in overwhelming number, 62%, for Jeremy Corbyn. What happens now? Do the damned, the purged, I'm one of them, get back in? Are we reinstated? Or do they stay expelled and suspended, whilst those who have done their best to destroy the Labour leadership continue not only to be inside the Labour Party, but to prosper within it? And we've got some calls, predictably enough, on that. Josh is a new caller. He wants to talk about the fallout of the Labour coup. Josh, welcome.
Oh, hey, George, all right. I talked to you a couple of weeks ago about this.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I just think it's all John McTernan being a psycho, really. I think now it's interesting. McDonnell's working. He's got Brown and Miliband's advisors on board, hasn't he? So I just think it was just one old bitter Blairite advisor just causing 3 months of chaos.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that he's psycho. I know him well.
Do you?
Of course, this is very much...
Oh, well, I was using a bit of rhetoric, George. You know, you can't be 100% serious all the time.
Well, I don't think we should throw... we shouldn't throw words like psycho around. We shouldn't throw psycho around gratuitously. Number two, the idea that all of this has been caused by one person who isn't even a member of Parliament, is clearly entirely wrong. Josh?
Philosophy on his 10 years in power that was all one person's fault.
I'm sorry?
Like, isn't me blaming John McTernan the same as you blaming Tony Blair for everything he did in power? Tony
Blair was the Prime Minister, I'll remind you. John McTernan is an ex-advisor.
who led Owen Smith's campaign?
No, he didn't lead Owen Smith's campaign, as it happens. He certainly supported it with gusto, that's true. But he didn't lead it, that's not true.
Okay, maybe I'm just being irrational.
I think you probably are. But not psycho. I would never say that. Let's go on to David in Stirling. Might get a better call from him. Go ahead, David.
Hi, George. See, big fan again. You know, I've spoke to you before.
Oh, yes, that's right, David, yes.
The American Bulldog, yeah. Listen, right, I was listening to Raymond. I actually had other points to make, but I was listening to Raymond, and I'll tell you something, he's spot on. He was right what he's saying.
It's all very suspicious, isn't it? It's all very suspicious that
there's not enough investigation going on there, George. I mean, that is unbelievable what's happening to kids. That needs to be totally investigated and sorted out. I mean, it's disgusting. It's a disgrace on society.
Well, the British establishment is responsible for much misery in the country and indeed in the wider world. But if they are responsible for even a fraction of that which is now alleged against them in terms of the torture, because it is a kind of torture of our own children.
The kids that went through, eh?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about children in the most vulnerable situation, children in care, children...
My son's in care, but because he's got special needs, but he can't talk, he can't relate to us, he can't do anything like that. He's in care, and he's 30-year-old. And we've made sure he's in the best home that he can actually be in. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, of course.
But we're still there watching all the way to see exactly how he's getting looked after. And believe me, he's went through a few homes that have been vicious towards him. You know what I'm saying? And they try to drug them up just to make them okay, just to make them tolerable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So tell me, let's get back to Labour for a minute, David. What do you think's going to happen now?
Right, Jeremy Corbyn is my man. He was 100%. He done well with that speech that he made the other day there.
That was a very good speech.
Right, and everybody seemed to be, apart from that, Khan. What'd you call him? Sadiq Khan.
Citizen Khan, yes.
Did you see him?
Yeah, he was
look in his face.
He was sucking lemons. He was sucking lemons. Yes.
Did you see the disdain in his face, George?
I did. Everyone's seen it on video, I think.
I would just get him right out the way. I would get him right out the picture. Come on.
Well, I'm hoping that everyone will stay together and work together for one end.
Well, George, I'll vote for you, pal. If you want to be Scottish leader, I'll be the first one in there for you.
Thank you very much.
That right now.
Thank you.
Believe me, you're the man for the job. You know what I'm saying?
Thanks, David. God bless you. I really appreciate that. I've got to press on because I'm flooded now with tweets at George Galloway at Talk Radio. It was China says, yeah, there are probably some offenders still lurking around in high places. Ricardo Picasso says the CSA inquiry seeing delay after delay after delay, postponing monstrous truths. A bit like Chilcot all over again. Very well said. Shane O'Malley said, be sure that the child abuse inquiry was set up to fail. Must say it begins to look like that. Adnan says the 99% has a voice. Corbyn is it. The 1% is scared. This isn't how things are meant to go. 21st century socialism is... Who is Owen Smith? Never heard of him. You'll never hear of him again, I must say. Steve's in Nuneaton, and he's on the line. Go ahead, Steve. Welcome.
Good evening, George. A pleasure to speak to you this evening.
And to you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to speak about the media bias, especially during the election coverage and also since, George.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you had Mar on Sunday was bleating about Labour's debt crisis. Labour's problem with immigration was on Newsnight again. Question time, tut-tuts all round, Labour in immigration again. And after their hatchet job failure on Momentum, George, they can't seem to get a look in now, while the Labour Tomorrow boys of Progress are turning in copious amounts of airtime on Sky and the BBC, and always appear to be pronouncing themselves as the moderate wing of Labour, and I never pulled up on it. And it's always speaking the forked tongue of the spin doctor, George.
I've got to laugh at this term moderate, I must say. They moderately annihilated 1 million people in Iraq. They moderately invaded country after country after country. They moderately deregulated the banks, which then collapsed, dragging the entire economy with it. They moderately froze public sector pay year after year. They're moderately, savagely attacking their own leader, day and hourly. And even worse, when I hear them described as not just moderates, but modernizers. I mean, that was the terminology in the 1980s. I'm not sure what it is that they are seeking to modernize, but let's take one example, Steve. It was the position of the moderates and the modernizers that trade union power should be abolished in the Labour Party and replaced by one member, one vote. Exactly. It was the moderate modernizers who claimed that they wanted a US Democratic Party style primaries for choosing Labour candidates and Labour leaders. And when they introduced it and got a result quite the opposite of that which they intended, well, they're moderately furious about it all.
Exactly, George, exactly. I mean, the voice has carried on this week. I mean, of course, you've had Diane Abbott called a Brexit racist, I think it was called, just as she had given a keynote speech on health, so nobody had to report it at all. In much the same way as Jeremy Corbyn was called a liar and Traingate, just as he was trying to push the NHS in his latest part of his election manifesto. It was absolutely shocking, George. And yet the Tories, you know, they're ramping it up warp speed in dismantling the NHS.
I didn't see Question Time last night. Did you see it?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
I'm told it was another bear garden, a bit like my setup at Hendon. Question Time. Was it as bad as that?
Well, if you can imagine the Question Time with John McDonnell, where they all sort of rounded on him, it was pretty much the same about Labour on that one, because it was in Boston, Lincolnshire, where they've had a problem with immigration. And this is what I was saying to you, George, on QT, it was all about Labour's problem with immigration.
Yeah. You wouldn't think the Tories have been in for the last 6 years, and they said they were going to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. In fact, it's hundreds of thousands. Steve, thanks for the call, my friend. It's George Galloway. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Listener comrades of the world, unite!
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
So we will. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Or you can tweet at George Galloway and at Talk Radio, as Ricardo has done. Corbyn and the Labour membership must lead by example. Don't give the MPs any more reason to damage Labour. I'm not sure they needed any reason, to be honest. Let's take one of these calls now. They're all coming in thick and fast. Let's hear from Ryan in Glasgow, my old stamping ground. Ryan, welcome.
How you doing, George? All right?
I'm good. Thanks for calling. Turn your radio down, would you please, because we're getting feedback.
Sorry. There you go.
Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Just here to talk about the state of Scottish Labour. It's an absolute shambles up here, honestly.
Well, it's not going well, is it? They've ended up in third place behind the Conservatives. When I left, they were completely dominant.
Yeah, they were, exactly. And I think the thing is, if you thought 10 years ago that Scottish Labour were more toxic than the Tories, folk think you're having a laugh.
Well, if somebody had told me that Scottish Labour... I mean, when I was the chairman of the Labour Party in Scotland at the age of 26, Labour was effectively in absolute control of parliamentary seats and almost all local authorities. They were the power in the land. If you'd said that to me then, that within 30 years that Scottish Labour will be behind the Conservatives and both of them would be miles behind the SNP, I would have thought you were crazy.
No, it's honestly incredible. I mean, the thing is about the Scottish politics at the moment, there's no credible leader to vote for except from the SNP, and I don't even like them. But to vote for Kezia Dugdale is just incredible.
Well, I do think that the people who've left Labour for the SNP, either as activist members, but more importantly, in a much larger number as voters, have had plenty of good reasons to drift away from Labour. The wars, the letdown of the whole Blair project, the deregulation, privatisation agenda of the Blairites, and one version of Blairite after another leading the Scottish Labour Party. It's hard, and of course the subject of nuclear weapons, it's hardly surprising that a lot of people of a left-wing mind have turned away from Labour. The problem is, if more and more of them vote SNP, they're going to end up with a result that they possibly don't want. The last referendum indicates that they don't want. They don't actually want to break the country up, but that's where it ends if you keep on voting SNP.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but as I say, I mean, this must be the worst Scottish Labour leader I can ever. I'm only 20, and I can never remember anybody even being as close to as bad as the one we've got in charge now in Scottish Labour. Yeah,
well, when I first went on the Scottish Labour Executive, which would be in 1975, the leader was a man called Willie Ross. He was an Ayrshireman, a burns specialist, and he looked and sounded like the King of Scotland. And then there was Bruce Millan, not quite as flamboyant, but extraordinarily capable. And then there was big Donald Dewar, who, of course, I had many disagreements with, but at least you could see why he was the leader of Scotland. But I'm afraid it's been all downhill since then.
I mean, I'd love to see you yourself, George, back up in Scotland fighting for it, because you're a true Labour man and believe in the cause, and I just don't believe Kezia Dugdale does.
Well, thanks, Ryan. I can't, of course, go into that. That would be an abuse of my position, but watch this space. Thanks, Ryan, for that lovely call. Rhys is in South Wales. Let's hear from him. Rhys, go ahead, sir.
Hi, George. Thanks for leaving me on. I just want to say this week, Jeremy's giving his speech and talking about immigration, and then Andrew Neil, I think it was, interviewed, I forget who it was, but one of the Labour gang on immigration as well, when they were at the conference. And I think that Jeremy's letting people down here. He's failing to articulate his point properly. What he said, apparently, what I've heard is that he doesn't have a fixation on numbers of immigration. And the tone around it suggests that he's not going to control the free movement of labour. Like me and you have spoke before, you're well aware that I'm against the free movement of labour, but I am for the free movement of people.
That's my position entirely.
Yeah. So my point is that he said that we need economics and immigration is connected, and I've heard this word quality chucked around. So they want quality immigration. Well, it's completely missing the point. All he has to say is that we want quality. If he wants quality immigration and he wants to take quality doctors or quality nurses or engineers here to build trains, he quite simply has to say, if we need 5,000 doctors, there's a number. We can allow 5,000 doctors in. If we need 10,000 engineers to build faster trains to go up and down our new railway system, then we're going to bring in 10,000 if we can't supply them or train them in the UK within that time. And I think he's going to severely suffer if he doesn't get this point right. Because his main obligation should be to the working people that reside in this country. Forget about nationality, it's neither here nor there. It's the working people that reside in this country, and his further obligation is to ensure that we can fulfil the roles and the infrastructure roles that come with his economic plan. And I don't think he articulates that point properly, and I think he's going to suffer terribly unless he does
well,
it.
I don't disagree with anything that you have said. I might disagree with the emphasis on one or two points. Nobody could credibly accuse me, of all people, of being a racist or not liking Johnny Foreigner. My entire life flies in the face of that kind of an allegation. In any case, this is not about race. The great majority of immigrants and migrant workers are from Eastern Europe, and they're as white as you or I. And it's not about religion, because most of them share our religion. The reality is it's about the supply of labour. And in a capitalist society, an unlimited and unlimitable increase in the supply of labour can only drive the price of labour down, can only undermine trade union organisation, undermine wages and conditions, and place unbearable strain on already austerity-ravaged public services. This is a matter of simple economics. It's nothing to do with race. It's nothing to do with nationality. Now, under our membership of the EU, we were not allowed to limit immigration. We're leaving the EU, and we then are allowed to limit immigration. Now, that, as you rightly say, is nothing to do with the free movement of people. It's nothing to do with people from here going there, from there going here, from here studying there, from there studying here. It's nothing to do with any of those things. It's about labour. It's about the right to come and work in our economy. Now, if we had a socialist economy, do you think we'd have free movement of labour? Of course we wouldn't, because we would have to defend our wages and conditions and our economic plan. Immigration should be planned just like all other aspects of the economy should be planned. If you're a person on the left, as I am, as Jeremy Corbyn is, you can't say that we want to plan steel production, we want to plan investment in automobile construction, production, but you're not going to plan the number of people who can come and work in your economy. Reese?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Everything you said is point on. But if he fails to articulate this point properly, and when we come to immigration, the majority of people are gender blind, and they're colour blind, and they're nationality blind. What we're going to have is the Tories will come out with the most obscene, ridiculous policy, 3 brown people every 3 years, and they will lie and lie and lie, and we will get something that's completely different to what they've promised. But I'm a Jeremy Corbyn supporter. I voted for him for the first time, I voted for him the second time, and I'll be voting for him even if I think he gets this wrong, because there's more in his favour for me and for the wider majority than there is against him. But this is going to be a breaker for him, I think. He's got to get it right, George, and they need. You can articulate it very well, and I've heard you do it many, many times. Why isn't anybody else in the Labour Party able to put just that little bit of articulation into the argument as you've done? You need to get back in, George.
OK, thanks very much, Reese. Very kind of you. James Ball says Yvette Cooper was happy to use her puff to attack John McDonnell and defend Esther McVeigh the next day. That was from the previous question time, I think. Gerard O'Neill says, why did they not want a card vote on the crucial issue of Scotland and Wales appointing 2 members to the NEC? Because they might have lost it. Trotsky says Adam Boulton and Peter O'Born both highlighted the real prospect of Corbyn in number 10, and yet the chief plotters were AWOL at Corbyn's speech. Well, I think if they had been there, they'd have been pleasantly surprised by just how powerful and eloquent a speech it was. Jeremy Corbyn has come on fantastically as a speaker in the last 12 months. And, of course, he's now strengthened his position as leader of the party. Now, coming up later in the programme, Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, joins us in studio to talk about Corbyn's rise. And after me at 10 o'clock, of course, is the inimitable Ian Lee, a terrific broadcaster. I listen to him on my way home every Friday night. And on Sunday morning from 8 a.m, don't miss Jake Yapp's unique look at the week's news, along with Britain's second longest running radio drama out of all the ones currently being broadcast, The Setters. So, in the next hour, as I say, it's Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, the improbable path to power of Jeremy Corbyn. And as he put it to me, and as I said earlier, there was more chance of the proverbial group of monkeys left at a typewriter for as long as you like, coming up with the complete works of Shakespeare, than Jeremy Corbyn not only winning the Labour leadership, but winning it again after a year of hell, and winning it with an even bigger majority. 0844 499 1000, that's the number to call. You can, of course, text talk and then your message to 87222, but that'll cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. Better if you can to tweet at George Galloway or at Talk Radio. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Across the UK, online and on DAB. Access all radios.
Talk Radio. Give it some lip. Talk Radio.
Jeremy Corbyn wins again. What's going to happen to those that were purged? And what are the moderates, the modernisers, the wreckers and saboteurs going to do next? We'll be talking to a young man, Alex Nuns, author of a brilliant new book on Corbyn's rise to power. It's called The Candidate, and I promise you it's well worth a read, and you'll agree after we've talked about it. And what about the collapse of Deutsche Bank? Now, you may say, well, it's only a bank and Germany is far away. But in fact, this can be a cloud no bigger than a German man's hand, which is a harbinger of a very great storm to come that will blow an ill wind through our own houses. And we'll be talking in the final hour about Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton and the US presidential elections. This is Friday. It must therefore be the mother of all talk shows, because you're listening to Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
0844 499 1000. Jeremy Corbyn. They tried, politically speaking, to kill him. He came back stronger than ever. But the big question is not just how did all this happen, but what happens next. And I know that a lot of you are interested in that because, well, frankly, hundreds of you are messaging me to that effect. So you'll enjoy the next period when we discuss with Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, Corbyn's Rise to Power, which has been updated, by the way, to include the recent coup which collapsed in ignominy in Liverpool just last week.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Now, just before I speak to Alex, let me try and clear some of the Twitter traffic. Shaz says they ought to be honest, admit they underestimated Corbyn and stop defending Blair. That won't win the election. And Fido Balks says they've rigged the NEC and pushed it through conference. Using the Scottish and Welsh appointments, members must ensure they are elected. And an SMS this time from Russell. Incredulous. For decades we were cursed with greedy and incompetent MPs. Now with Jeremy Corbyn, a principled and honest man, has rocked the corrupt in all quarters, including the media and the BBC. He has won election after election, increasing his power, like the Ramoners and the EU, good at backing losers. There was a by-election in Blackpool last night, by the way, in which Labour got over 50% of the vote in, I think, a 4, maybe a 5-party race. James says, Peston on Sunday, Yvette Cooper spent the interview defending Esther McVeigh and attacking MacDonnell. Indeed, It's bizarre. Shane says our union leaders all accepted multiple places on boards, state and semi-state bodies, thus compromising themselves. And he goes on, problem with Irish unions in boom times, union leaders gave themselves lotto-style wages and expenses. I was in Galway actually this week and Kilkenny the week before, and I'm headed for Dublin and for Armagh and for Belfast and for Derry over the next weeks. And on Sunday morning, God willing, I'll be flying to Canada. Talk about a flying visit. I'll be in Canada for 24 hours. Now, Alex Nuns is a young man. He's not quite as young as he looks, but he's a very clever young man at that. Not only is he a terrific journalist with the magazine Red Pepper, he is the author of The Candidate, Corbyn's Improbable Rise to Power. And I'm glad to say he joins me now. Alex, thanks for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Why don't you just talk us through the book first?
Well, the book sets out to answer the question, how on earth did Jeremy Corbyn become leader of the Labour Party? Because it was such an unlikely prospect. Nobody more so than Jeremy Corbyn doubted that he could become leader of the Labour Party because it was so improbable.
Well, I'll tell you what, before he got the nominations to get into the race, he has to talk to me at the TUC in Great Russell Street, and he said, am I doing the right thing? And I said to him, you are doing the right thing. You've got nothing to lose. Potentially you've got everything to gain. If you get on the ballot, I think you'll do really very well. I think they're completely underestimating that. I did add the caveat, that's probably why you won't get enough nominations to get on the ballot. But of course, he did, with seconds to spare and only exactly the right number. Go on.
Well, there was actually a debate. I mean, you were on one side of that debate, and there were other people like John Landsman on the same side. But John McDonnell, for example, the current Shadow Chancellor, he was very sceptical. He thought that they wouldn't get on the ballot, and there was no point in trying, because to march people up to the top of the hill and then disappoint them would be crushing. Owen Jones, the writer, had the same opinion, said that the left would be crushed if it stood. So it wasn't clear. You say he had nothing to lose, and I happen to agree with you, but there were a lot of people on the left who didn't think that way, but he still went for it. And as you say, the biggest hurdle was getting on the ballot, because that was the area of the contest that the MPs still controlled. A candidate had to have 15% of the PLP back him in order to be on the ballot, which was seen as too high for the left of the Labour Party. John McDonnell had tried in 2007, 2010, failed to get enough nominations. Michael Meacher in 2007 failed to get enough nominations. So that was their big veto. And I think one of the ironies of Corbyn's rise is that he really only got those 30... We got 36 nominations, actually. He needed 35. He really only got those 36 nominations because the PLP perceived him as no threat. You know, they thought he was such a nice man, such a mild-mannered man, he couldn't take them down. And so they allowed him to get onto the ballot, and obviously they later regretted it.
He is a nice man, and he is a mild-mannered man, and probably only he could have got 36 nominations. Others, some of whom you've mentioned, probably couldn't have got that 36 nominations. There are others who describe themselves now as morons for having done so, just wanted to be seen to facilitate the maximum breadth of candidates. Some others, Sadiq Khan for example, sought to ingratiate himself with Corbyn and his supporters so that they would ask their supporters to nominate him for the Labour nomination for London Mayor. So there were many different things in play, but he got the nominations. What happened next?
Well, as soon as he got out to the membership, as soon as he got out from the kind of stuffy corridors of Westminster out into the real world where real politics was happening, the campaign team that Corbyn put together was immediately astonished by the level of support he had. I mean, he went on the big anti-austerity demonstration, People's Assembly demonstration, 5 days after he got on the ballot. That was, I think, 250,000 people on the streets. Corbyn made a speech there. They were giving out leaflets saying pay £3 to have a vote in the leadership contest, and saying to people, if everybody on this demonstration wins, he could become leader of the Labour Party, which seemed outrageous and completely unlikely at the time, but that's what happened. But it wasn't just those people on the anti-austerity march, it was also Labour Party members. As soon as the Corbyn team started phoning up Labour Party members, canvassing them, who are you going to vote for, they found that they were in the lead. And this was before the press had covered Corbyn at all. Most of the population had no idea who Jeremy Corbyn was. And members were telling phone canvassers, yes, we're going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, to the extent that the team thought it was too good to be true. And John Landsman, who was in charge of that side of the campaign, didn't even tell Jeremy Corbyn because he thought it was so, implausible, and also he thought it would scare him. So this was extraordinary. Then in the nominations of the constituency Labour parties, local parties, they all have to nominate who they want to lead the party. It has no significance in the final vote, but it's an indication of support and momentum and so on. And Corbyn started off in third in the very first kind of week, but which was already for the people on the left. They thought that was great because they were ahead of the Blairite candidate Liz Kendall. They were doing pretty well. And then they quickly moved into second ahead of Vivek Cooper. Andy Burnham was in the lead, and I think it was a month into the contest they overtook Andy Burnham, went into the lead in CLP nominations, which was uncharted territory for the left.
And what was the reason for that? Just his charm, just his honesty, sincerity, and steadfastness over so many decades? Or was it also something to do with the fact that, with all respect, at least that respect which is due to the others, it was a bit of a donkey derby otherwise, wasn't it? I mean, it was the bland leading the bland, the other candidates.
I think so, and I think that says a lot about the composition of the PLP. I think it became progressively more kind of mediocre, the quality of the MPs, of the Labour MPs, which is why I find the current debate about electing the shadow cabinet quite funny, because the new ones who have come in, they seem pretty good, pretty feisty. The old ones, they lost 2 elections, they were never that great. I don't know why, they seem to have an overinflated view of themselves. But I think that was a consequence of the Blair era, because in the Blair era, the way Labour selected its parliamentary candidates, who was going to become an MP, was so tightly monitored and controlled by Number 10 and by the Labour Party machine, that it ended up prizing conformity over talent, essentially. So you got a load of people who would agree with Blair, who would vote for, wars, but wouldn't rock the boat. And they're not the kind of people, they didn't build themselves up as independent politicians. They didn't have that strength of vision at their own particular political standpoint. So I think that explains why Corbyn's opponents were widely seen as not the best.
Yeah, I mean, maybe donkey derby's a bit harsh. They were worthy but dull. Is probably a fairer way of putting it. Andy Burnham, I always thought had a bit of class about him. I think he was the best of the others. Liz Kendall, Yvette Cooper, who else was there? Anybody else? Was that
no,
it?
That was it.
They're workaday politicians, not anybody's idea of a leader. You'd make them a minister, but when I've lived a long life, and I've been an employee of the Labour Party when its leadership included not just Harold Wilson, but James Callaghan and Roy Jenkins and Dennis Healy and Tony Benn and Tony Crossland and Richard Crossman and Barbara Castle and many, many other giant figures. It wasn't anything like that, was it?
No, I think it's because of this process of making them conform so strictly that you just end up with tramlined politicians. In fact, I spoke for the book. I interviewed a guy called Luke Akehurst, who's he's quite, he's a fierce sectarian on the right of the party. But even he said that the quality of the MPs, the initial Blairite MPs who came up with Blair and Brown, they were quite battle-hardened. They'd had to fight the left to get there during the 1980s and 1990s. So even though I disagree with them, they were, they had a bit of gumption. Whereas the next generation, there tended to be people who had gone to university, become special advisors, gone through the networks of progress.
They were handed political
Yeah, they didn't
office.
have to fight for it, yeah.
No, that's a fact. Now, so he's then beginning to pick up steam, and then the media get wind of this, and what is unleashed is the mother of all gales of abuse. How did he manage to survive that?
Well, actually, it had the opposite effect from what the media expected. They unleashed this, as you said, it was just a storm of well, it was actually panic to start off with. I mean, there was a YouGov poll in the middle of July, or 22nd, I think, of July, which put Jeremy Corbyn in the lead, which nobody in the media had any inkling that was going to be the case until then. Despite there was a previous story in the New Statesman, but that was just private polling. Nobody knew really where it came from. So this YouGov poll came out, confirmed that Corbyn was in the lead. I remember watching BBC Newsnight on the night that news broke, and there was Kirsty Walk and Allegra Stratton, the political editor then, and there was John McTernan, the Blairite advisor, was the guest. And they were all, you could tell the adrenaline was pumping, they were talking quickly, they couldn't believe it. The famed impartiality of the BBC was completely ditched as they said, this is going to be a disaster.
You're having a laugh.
And you could just see the panic that was going to take place in the media. And then in the following days, especially the Guardian, even the so-called left press, the Guardian, the Mirror, the Independent, they went completely crazy. I mean, the Guardian carried kind of 8 anti-Corbyn opinion pieces over 2 days and not one pro-Corbyn opinion piece. They were completely going for him.
The Guardian's as bad as the Daily Mail.
It's in some senses worse. I mean, it's not as you can make fun of the Daily Mail. It's much easier to make fun of the Daily Mail. The Guardian's supposed to be the voice of the liberal left. It's where leftish opinion forming happens, and I think it basically has a view that if you're on the left of the touchline that it mans, which we now know goes straight through the Parliamentary Labour Party, you're illegitimate. If you're on the right of it, you can be supported and respected and so on. But yeah, the fact was that it was so overwhelming, so uniform, this reaction from the media, that the Corbyn supporters, or potential Corbyn supporters, people who weren't even necessarily Corbyn supporters at that point, reacted against it, actually galvanised them. And I think that's something to do with social media, the fact that people had an alternative source of information that they could critique the mainstream press on. And I think it's also because that group of people, Labour members, they're political people, they're aware, they're not stupid. And whereas that stuff is probably more effective with the general public, with people who are accustomed to discussing politics.
I mean, if you've joined a political party, you clearly have a greater than average understanding of what the politics at play are. This is Alex Nunns I'm talking to. He's the author of The Candidate, Jeremy Corbyn's Improbable Path to Power. It's a fantastic book, and we'll be discussing it for the next 15-16 minutes or so. If you want to have your say, you can talk to me or Alex, I hope. 0844 499 1000 is the number to call, but I must take a break for some capitalist messages.
Controversial conversation and cutting-edge current affairs comment with the notorious B.I.G.G.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
Listen, this guy's a nightmare. He's not a great guy, folks.
I'll be turning to you later, Mr. Trumpeter. Now, we're talking with Alex Nunns, the author of The Candidate, Corbyn's Improbable Rise to Power. It's a tremendous book, and I'll tell you how you can get it later. But if you want to call, 0844 499 1000 now. Peter in Glasgow says, if you can't say these Blairites are psycho, can I call them traitors to the Labour cause? Or will that get me expelled? Well, it would, Peter, certainly before the leadership election, and certainly if I told them your telephone number, which I have no intention of doing. Patrick Simmons says some people need someone or something to blame on past failures. Convenient. And Peter Thompson says, put to the vote, I fancy the SNP will pull it off. Their political opposition is so weak. But will they risk it? I'm not actually sure what that is in connection with, Peter. Maybe it'll become clear later. John Robbins said, if I were you, I'd join the Greens. They're definitely a growing force. Oops, I'll be suspended now. Can I just advise all you chaps to change your name on Twitter so that it's not quite so easy for the Blairite machine, which is still in their hands, and I'll come to that with Alex in a minute, to actually root you out, if you'll forgive the pun. I wouldn't join the Greens, I'm red, me. Luby Lou says, but the biggest laugh of all, George, was Blair becoming peace envoy for the Middle East. Indeed. People will read again. How, George, your accurate assessment of the economy was refreshing. What becomes of those who only have Labour to offer in the UK? Quite so. Very well put. Now, Alex, you've told us how Corbyn came to power. How did he manage to do it all over again?
It was actually a lot of the same forces, which is quite surprising because you would have thought his opponents would have learnt something from the first time, but they didn't appear to. But when the coup happened in June this year, basically the Labour right seemed to think that if they just resigned, made a big fuss in the media, that they could force Corbyn to resign. The whole point of the coup...
That was the game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, they knew that they couldn't win another election. They hoped to avoid an election by breaking the man.
Exactly. That's what Diane Abbott said. She was in that meeting of the PLP on the evening of, I think, 27th of June, when MP after MP stood up to abuse Corbyn. It was nothing about his politics. It was just about his personal characteristics that they were attacking. And they wanted him to... They thought he was, they imagine him as a kind of weak guy who they can just bully into doing what they want. And so they thought that he would just give up.
It was organised bullying. It was the closest thing to a fascist beer hall bully session that I think has ever been seen or heard inside Westminster, and I have that from several people who were actually there.
Well, even Peter Mandelson said he's never been to a meeting like it. I mean, probably he thought that was good, but... so that's what they did. And if it had been a normal politician in Jeremy Corbyn's place, if it had been a politician who got to the top of the Labour Party through Parliament and through the press, which is a normal route to go down, it would have worked, because that would have been his power base destroyed. But of course, Jeremy Corbyn didn't get there through those avenues. He got there in spite of those avenues.
He's also not quite as nice as he looks, in the sense that, he's a tough guy.
He's incredibly stubborn. I mean, well, there's two things. He's incredibly stubborn. He won't give up on something he believes in.
No, he hasn't given up in 40 years. He's not going to do it now at their behest.
Precisely. But second of all, there is a political grounding to this. He believes in power from below. He believes in party democracy and wider democracy. He thinks that power emanates from society, that things happen in society, and that the action in Parliament is really the last stage of processes that have already happened. So his whole outlook is a grassroots up outlook, not a top-down outlook, which is very radical for the Labour Party, because the Labour Party is traditionally, historically been...
It's kind of Fabian idea of people at the top giving out to the people down below.
Patrician kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's what Ralph Miliband called parliamentarism, by which he meant sort of an over-exaggerated reverence for Parliament and the monarchy, and this idea that power is centred in Westminster. And that's what, when Neil Kinnock made that speech he made a speech in private to the Parliamentary Labour Party, which was leaked.
You say in private,
yeah.
But they took care to make sure we all got every word, every dot and comma.
Surprisingly, a perfect recording ended up on the Guardian website.
Yeah.
Who knows how that happened? But when he made that speech, he said he kind of pounded the desk and said, "This is our party, and we're a parliamentary party," which is obviously true historically. Labour was founded by the unions to be their voice in Parliament.
It's not what Kinnock used to say, however.
Well, Kinnock changed quite a lot, didn't he? But
I think we should remind the listeners we're talking about the Baron Kinnock, not his wife, the Baroness Kinnock, or his son, the right-wing Labour MP, Stephen Kinnock. We're talking about Baron Kinnock. Go on.
I can't remember what I was talking
well,
about.
let me take you somewhere, just because of the hour. It was another stupendous victory, but the war ain't over, because strategic heights are still held by Corbyn's enemies, from which they can rain down some very devastating fire. Tell us about that.
That's right. We just had the Labour Party conference this week, and it was a good, in ways, it was a good conference for Jeremy Corbyn. Obviously, it was fantastic that he won the leadership with 62%, increased his mandate, complete authority now as the leader. And it was a good speech by him. There was a good speech by John McDonnell. There was a great speech by Angela Rayner, new education spokesperson. And so in many ways it was a good conference, but there was a crucial defeat, which was to do with the National Executive Committee, which has enormous power in the Labour Party. That was shown in the coup. What it came down to in the end.
They purged the 240,000.
They did that, yeah.
They are able to set the rules for the leadership elections and so on.
And also they had the power at the crucial moment to prevent Jeremy Corbyn from automatically being on the ballot. They lost that vote, but it was a very tight vote.
They tried, yeah.
They tried it really hard. So it's an incredibly important committee. And over the summer, there were, as well as Jeremy Corbyn's election, there was an internal election in the Labour Party for committee members of the National Executive Committee, and Corbyn supporters, Momentum people, won all 6 seats that were up for grabs, which would have given Corbyn a majority. And in response, the National Executive Committee, still the old National Executive, with an slight anti-Corbyn majority, decided to expand itself by 2 to just completely to obviate the fact that these new pro-Corbyn delegates have been elected. And they did that by allowing the Scottish and the Welsh a representative on the NEC, which doesn't sound too bad.
Scottish and Welsh leaders.
Yeah, they made it the leaders, or somebody appointed by the leaders. And so, whereas Corbyn was saying it's okay, but the Scottish and Welsh members should vote who their representative is. So basically, they've managed to get a situation where the National Executive has still got an anti-Corbyn majority. They got that through conference, through some very, very dodgy chicanery and some
old-style chicanery, yes. Skullduggery.
Yeah, there was some real tension and hostility and anger on the conference floor. People realised they were being stitched up as it was going on. Basically, there was this... They did a show of hands, and people thought it was 50-50, demanded that there be a card vote so that they could count whether it was 50-50 or not. But the person who was chairing the session refused to have a card vote, just said that they'd won. And there was a lot of anger about that. But that was a big victory because, I mean, Corbyn's project is to democratise the Labour Party, to open it up, to allow members to set policy and to have more of a say in the way the party's run. And if he hasn't got the National Executive Committee, it becomes very difficult to get that stuff through. And I think what we've seen, the 9 months that Corbyn was in power, if you can call it power, in the Labour Party, a lot of people got frustrated, even supporters got frustrated, saying it's not moving fast enough, there's not enough happening, there's not enough policy. And I think a lot of that was because it was very difficult to get anything done when you're in a shadow cabinet surrounded by opponents with an NEC which is not necessarily on your side. So I think that's a big problem.
Well, we'll talk about what's going to happen next, given that, and listeners can call you or I on 0844 499 1000. Take this opportunity to talk to a man who knows, as you've already discovered, all the ins and outs of where we've been, how we got here, and what happens next. He's Alex Nuns, the author of The Candidate. Who's the publisher, Alex? Remind me.
The publisher is OR Books.
OR Books.
And to get the book, the best way to get the book is to go to their website, orbooks.com. I think they've got 15% off as a...
orbooks.com, 15% off. I promise you won't regret it if you buy that book. As I say, we're talking Deutsche Bank later in the programme with economist Jonathan Davis, and that's a very, very important story too. So stick around, make sure you stay tuned to Talk Radio. This is the mother of all talk shows.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Okay, call me 0844 499 1000. Christina in Essex she's one of the damned. Not just suspended like most, actually expelled. But then her crime was very serious and deserved condign punishment, no doubt. She was expelled for being a friend of mine. Christina, welcome.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Now tell us where your story currently lies.
Well, it currently lies that I'm still expelled, but then one letter said I was expelled, and then the second letter that they sent me said that I was, just suspended from voting. So it's some confusion. So I thought, well, I'll go through and...
Well, don't kick the dog to see if it's asleep. Throw away the one that said you were expelled and start dealing on the one that said you were suspended from voting.
Okay, so then I thought, well, I'll try and contact them and find out. I've gone through, eventually got through to them, to the Labour Party, but unfortunately they're still on holiday from the conference. They're taking an extended holiday, it would appear. So they couldn't really kind of answer my questions. Am I suspended? Am I expelled? So they said you need to contact legal inquiries through the Labour Party and find out. So that's the situation. I still don't know.
Which one came? The second one said you were suspended, right?
It said I was suspended from voting. The initial one said that I had been expelled. Well,
my clear advice is that first one never existed. It's clearly a mistake. The most up-to-date one is the one that you should deal with. Let me ask Alex if he knows what's going to happen to people like Christina and hundreds of thousands of them.
I have no idea, but that's because the processes of the Labour Party are so opaque and unclear. And one of the good things about the Shami Chakrabarti report, which she did with the anti-Semitism furore, her recommendations were that the processes by which people are suspended have to be clear. They have to know what they're accused of. They have to be able to defend themselves. It has to be just normal, justice, which the Labour Party doesn't have at the moment. And the sooner they have that, the better, because obviously it's completely unacceptable if people have paid money to a party, they're suspended and not told why, and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, and they can't reach anyone because they're all on holiday. But I'm right in saying, amn't I, that the ultimate arbiter, beyond the ultimate recourse to the courts, which of course is open to everybody, has been tried already, with mixed success, but leaving aside the courts, the ultimate arbiter is this National Executive Committee that, as you described, is now back in the hands of Jeremy Corbyn's enemies.
I mean, there's a subcommittee of that committee called the National Constitutional Committee. I think is that not the body that takes the actual decisions? Well,
the elections to that didn't go well either.
No, they didn't. So yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a big block, but they can't keep all these people suspended. It's too many. There are too many cases where people could go to court and could probably do quite well. So I think they'll have to have some kind of process.
They might just leave it at thee and me, Christina. They might just let everybody else back in, bar us. Now, Christina,
I can't see much hope, to be honest with you. I thought before this decision on the NEC, but there may be a chance. But now I'm feeling.
I think if it was up to Jeremy Corbyn, we'd all be back in. But the problem is, it isn't up to him. But I'm right in saying that people like you are a little bit disappointed that no one, at least no one apart from me and you, are talking about this issue. Do you think that that's because they're working quietly behind the scenes on it, or hopefully not?
I'm so confused. This is why I was going to ring in to ask you, because I just think before everybody was on it, wasn't they? So you had all the bloggers, the well-known left bloggers, you had all the well-known tweeters, all the big names, and it was like all the time before the leadership result. And now there's nobody speaking about it. And obviously there's thousands upon thousands of people in limbo saying, well, what's going to happen to us? Why has it all been swept under the carpet? Why are we just forgotten? What is going to happen?
Poignant indeed. Christina, thanks for that. I promise you I'll never forget you and I'll never give up. Guy is in Stoke-on-Trent, has a question for Alex. Guy, go ahead.
Yeah, my question would be, in the last election, why didn't any of the big hitters, John Watson, Hilary Benn, Tristram, Chucker, Harriet, why didn't they stand against Jeremy?
Because they knew they would lose. They didn't want to risk their reputations by being crushed by Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, I don't think we're going to hear much from Owen Smith.
But they couldn't have known they were going to lose right at the very beginning, because this year, yeah. But why? I think Guy's asking why they didn't stand the first time. Because they were second order compared to Burnham and Cooper and so on.
You have to factor in the kind of micro factions of the Labour right. I mean, the Blairites had loads of candidates. It was difficult to find a Blairite who wasn't preparing to stand. You had Tristram Hunt, you had Liz Kendall, you had Mary Cray. In the background there was Ben Bradshaw, Stella Creasy, Caroline Flint, who ended up going for the deputy leadership. Chuck Ramuna, of course. So there were lots of people around. Chuck Ramuna stood, he was the favourite, and then...
he was first in and first out.
Exactly. 2 days later he left the race, no one really knows why. Then it ended up with Tristram Hunt, Liz Kendall and Mary Cray competing to be the Blairite candidate. And I think one of the fascinating things that people don't really realise is that they only had enough MPs, the Blairites, the actual proper real hard Blairites, they only had enough MPs to get one candidate into the race. Liz Kendall got 41 nominations, she needed 35, she got 41, she was only 6 over the threshold. They're not actually that powerful.
And she got 4.5% of the vote.
But they're even less popular in the party as a whole. But I mean, even in the parliamentary party, there's a big group of kind of generally right Labour MPs. But in terms of the real true believers of Blair, there aren't a huge number, 41 it seems. So that's why there was only one of the Blairite candidates. They ended up with Liz Kendall because she was kind of new and they didn't really. She seemed
quite nice.
Yeah. Tristram Hunt made a bit of a fool of himself. He was going around. I mean, one of the best.
He's a big palooka, him. He. I'm sorry, Guy. I know he's your MP, but I mean, he really is the original big palooka. What do you think?
Well, he doesn't do it for me, but is one of these big hitters going to come next time? Because if the MPs don't leave the party, which I don't think they will, surely they're going to try and bring their biggest star, their Galactico, to see if he can do it, or she can do it.
If only they had a Galactico. I myself don't think there will be another leadership challenge, but let's hear what Alex thinks.
Well, I don't know, you can never underestimate them. I mean, I didn't think that they would go for a leadership challenge after 9 months. They did, so who knows? But I think they must realise that it's not doing them any good at the moment, and they should really go away and they should come up with some political ideas that they want to promote. That's the best way they could do it. At the moment, they're just trying to reheat 1997. It's not going to work.
And they don't have a Galactico.
They don't have a big candidate at all. On Tristram Hunt, I just want to say one of the funny things I found out when I was doing my book was that he made this intervention into the leadership contest when he was still a putative candidate. He said that Labour should appeal to people who aspire to shop in Waitrose and John Lewis, and he's obviously the MP in Stoke-on-Trent. And
he's got a little problem. He's got a slight problem. Is we ain't got a Waitrose in Stoke-on-Trent. I don't know if he knows that. Maybe he doesn't spend a great deal of time up there.
I think that's true. He's actually, I mean, I know him, and I've even read some of his books. He is actually a very clever, intelligent guy, and quite engaging, actually, but he's the wisest fool in Christendom. He's got no political touch, and no touch with the masses. And the Waitrose gaffe proved that. There is no Waitrose in Stoke-on-Trent.
Not only that, Waitrose issued a statement which the Stoke Sentinel reported, saying they didn't have any plans to open the Waitrose because people weren't upmarket enough. So, I mean, there's an electoral strategy for Tristram Hunt. It wasn't going to work.
He also told the Cambridge Union, I know because I spoke there the same week as him, that this is what he said, and I'm quoting him: "You are the 1%. You've got to step forward and take control."
Unbelievable.
Guy.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but don't you think we've had enough problems created in the country by people who've gone to the most elitist schools, such as Eton? And I've got a memory that I read that Chucker decided to chuck in the election race because it was reported he was visiting some swanky clubs in London.
Well, he definitely was visiting swanky clubs, and he made some rash public comments about how he could find a place which wasn't filled with trash, which was the very word that he used. I doubt if that's the reason why he chucked it. Perhaps we oughtn't to go further down that road. Let's just say it's a mystery why Chucker chucked it. Guy in Stoke-on-Trent, thanks very much for your call. I must take a break for more capitalist messages.
Big Georgie Galloway's back on the radio!
Galloway, celebrate! The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
0844 499 1000, that's the number to call. You can tweet me at George Galloway or at Talk Radio, or preferably both. I'm talking to Alex Nuns, author of The Candidate, Jeremy Corbyn's Improbable Path to Power, and we're taking calls to Alex and me, and this one's from John in Glasgow. John, welcome to the show. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. To me, Jeremy Corbyn has a clear mandate and the perfect justification now to basically empty out the toy box that is the current parliamentary Labour Party. Not only do the vast majority of the parliamentary party willfully ignore what the party membership want, they also, most of these people are currently in constituencies where the vast majority of their constituents voted to leave the European Union, and they wish to ignore that as well. So Jeremy Corbyn doesn't just have to worry about internal party politics, perhaps to get a justification. The country at large is at odds with the vast majority of these people, it seems to me, as well.
Well, I think, John, what he's doing, and Alex can comment on this, what he's planning to do, presume has started doing, is to try and separate rather than throw the toys out the box, but to try and separate the absolutely irreconcilable with those that can be won back into the fold. Am I right, Alex?
I think so. I think that's his whole strategy, but that's been his strategy all along. I think he and John McDonnell actually believe in this idea of left, right and centre at the top of the Labour Party, that the kind of old Harold Wilson idea that you have everybody in there. So I think that's what he wants to do, but as you say, there are some people who won't play along, and there's this boundary change coming up, so I don't think it's necessarily going to take that much effort to I don't think there needs to be a big mandatory reselection rule change, which I think they'd struggle to get through anyway, because I think there'll be ways of doing it without that.
The thing is that those who are irreconcilable appear to be few in number. The question is those who are not publicly irreconcilable but privately nursing their wrath, and whether they'll go back with a good grace onto the front bench, and how do you get what do you do with the people who are on the front bench? A second point I'd like to ask you, if John stays on the line, is this. We keep hearing about the inherent reasonableness of the MPs being given the power to elect the shadow cabinet. It is less often pointed out that that would mean the end of John McDonnell, the end of Diane Abbott. All of Corbyn's allies would be voted off the shadow cabinet, and Jeremy Corbyn would be sitting there as the leader, surrounded by a shadow cabinet irredeemably hostile to him. Now, when you put it that way, you can understand why he says no.
Yeah, he can't accede to that. I mean, for a start, the MPs who stayed loyal, who stepped up and helped him out in the time of crisis. I mean, remember, this was a time of national instability. You know, whether you were for Brexit or against Brexit, it was an unstable time afterwards. And at that moment, the old shadow cabinet chose to, or most of it chose to resign, and new people came in, and to reward those new people for their service by then sacking them just because the old lot want to come back, I think would be, monstrous. I don't think he should do that at all.
Doesn't sound like the sort of thing Jeremy Corbyn does. John, what do you think?
Well, I think there's certainly he has to feel his way with how he moves forward, but he does have to move forward, and I think the time has come for a few interviews without coffee, shall we say, to see who is willing to be reconciled to the politics of the future, because leaving aside the fact that they disregard the membership, disregard the leave vote of the people in the country, there's the matter of the politics of the chameleon that seems to pervade a great part of the politics in the Labour Party as we stand at the moment. I mean, up here in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale wakes up in the morning and she has to figure out what she wants to stand for that day by opening the window to see what way the wind blows.
Speaking of Scotland, John, there's only one Scottish Labour MP, and he resigned from the front bench, leaving Labour without a single Scottish MP, not a single one, to even go through the motions of being the shadow Secretary of State for Scotland. As an act of treachery. That's pretty hard to beat,
Well, it's not just treachery, it's shameful to Scotland. If the man doesn't have any sense of responsibility to the country that he represents in the country of his birth, leaving aside his allegiances to Jeremy, Corbyn or anybody else, there's that aspect in its own right. If he's the only Labour man up here, he should be willing to stand up and represent the people.
You're right, that's a very good point. He didn't just betray Labour, he betrayed Scotland by doing that. It means Scotland's had to find somebody representing an English constituency who is English, who is also the shadow Northern Ireland Secretary, to be the shadow Scottish Secretary. I mean, talk about a wrecking move. It's all the more, John, because, I don't know about you, I'd never heard of the guy. If he was sitting in the studio, I wouldn't know who he was. I still can't tell you his name.
It's shamefaced. It's absolutely shamefaced, and really, there's more than just the politics that's involved internally in the Labour Party. There's the matter of there's two big things. I don't necessarily agree with everything Jeremy Corbyn stands for day to day, or even yourself, George. But there's two big issues in the politics of our time. That is the United Kingdom and leaving Europe, and on that is the number one priority, and that should rise above everything else.
John, you're a gentleman and you've got a great radio voice, so don't be a stranger. Keep coming back to the show.
I will
Thanks.
do indeed, George. Thank
John
you.
in Glasgow, and I'm talking with Alex Nuns. Trudy has tweeted, I really like Andy Burnham MP. Wish I'd supported him at the very beginning after seeing him in the House of Commons. I like him too. He's actually the only one of those that I like as a person. George Kinnock and his Blairites are still saying Jeremy is another Michael Foot waiting to happen. I will vote for Corbyn in the next general election, but how can he win with all this hate from inside the Labour Party itself? Ray in London. It's a good question, Alex.
Well, I mean, it's obviously divided parties are not normally successful, so it's a huge problem, and that's really the crux of the strategy of Corbyn's opponents. They're trying to make Labour fail electorally so that they can get rid of Corbyn. Peter Mandelson even said he's praying for an early general election.
Praying for an early election so the Tories can sweep back to victory.
I mean, it's just outrageous.
I'm old enough to know. I knew Peter Mandelson when he was a communist. Can you believe that? Buster Guff says, unless we take on the private banks, then the status quo will prevail. Balder the Brave says, why won't the Blairites just start a new party? What's stopping them? Is it finance? I would have thought that was the last thing that would stop them. Please help. Well, Alex, why don't they? I mean, or might they at some stage?
I've never thought they will, for one simple reason: they're not good enough. They haven't got the candidates. They haven't got the when Roy Jenkins, Shirley Williams, Bill Rogers and David Owen,
the Gang of Four, they were very big figures.
Exactly. Everybody knew who they were. They were famous. Who have the Blairites got who's famous? They haven't really got, and maybe Chukwuemeka, but probably most people don't know who he is either.
No, they don't know. I mean, he does have some je ne sais quoi. He does have a bit of star quality in my view, has a bit of charisma. He's a fine-looking man and all that, and he can talk, but he doesn't actually stand for anything. In fact, he stands now for something quite different to what he stood for when he came into Parliament.
Yeah, he was an Ed Miliband supporter in 2010, and he's suddenly become a Blairite when Blairism's on the wane, which is interesting political strategy. But I think it's more than just the personalities. I think that they don't have the political project to do anymore. They're still trying to do the 1990s. It's the context has changed completely, but they're stuck in a kind of dogma where they want to go back and repeat the same formulas. And I don't think that they've got that, and I don't think they've got the organisational capacity to build a new party, which is a really hard thing to do, especially in the UK with first past the post. So I can't see them doing it for those reasons.
Jimmy's got a question up in Manchester. Jimmy, welcome to the show. Go ahead.
Hiya, George. Thanks very much. It's just a quick one. I just from when we're going back to June with the Brexit.
Yeah. And
people were saying that Jeremy had sort of wasn't really an out campaign, but to sort of appease and go with Hillary Benn. He said, well, we'll stay. I was wondering why he didn't go with his courage of his conviction, really. If that was his I don't know.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I don't think there are many people around who know him better than I do. He has always been against the European Union, not against Europe, of course, but against the kind of European Union that we have. But he took the view, first of all, that he was the leader of the Labour Party, and the Labour Party and the unions had a very clear pro-EU position, though there was an honourable minority within. And secondly, that a Tory-led Brexit would lead to very severe setbacks for working-class people. So he did work harder than anybody else in the Labour Party to deliver a Remain vote. He actually delivered one in huge numbers in his own area, whereas all the people now blaming him for the Brexit vote, their own constituents voted overwhelmingly to leave. Jimmy?
George, absolutely. I'm totally with you there, because, I mean, everybody else was getting the blame. Apparently he was all on Jeremy. I mean, Cameron dived out there as if he was had nothing to do with it, and he was left to sort of take the blame.
Well, I mean, I just don't think there's any case for blaming Jeremy Corbyn for Brexit? Alex?
Well, there's not. The psephologist John Curtis, who's probably the preeminent psephologist, he's done an analysis and he's come to the conclusion that there's no evidence that Jeremy Corbyn, was to blame for Brexit. The idea that just because he wasn't enthusiastic enough on TV, 1 million people changed their vote the other way, I think has always been preposterous. And there are lots of Labour MPs...
He would have looked like a total hypocrite if he'd been enthusiastic.
Yeah.
He gave the EU 7.5 out of 10. Frankly, that was exceedingly generous. I would have given it 3.5.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how they can blame him is beyond me.
Also, he did 123 media appearances, which was more than the rest of the Shadow Cabinet put together. Alan Johnson, the man running...
He was in charge of it.
He did 19 media appearances, and it was his job.
It's just unbelievable. Jimmy, do you agree?
Absolutely, George. You've played it right up to me. I would just... No doubt in my mind, Jeremy's he's the man. He's the man. What I'm saying, I was just a little bit of confused as to why he didn't really sort of go with the outcome thing, and now you're with it. I'm with it.
Think of the trouble that have been then. Jimmy, did you see the game Celtic-Manchester City the other night?
George, I did, and as a Manchester City fan, I was a little bit disappointed with the way City played.
But Celtic were...
George, if I was a neutral there, I would have loved that game. Fantastic game of football.
I was very proud of them. A comeback after a 7...
Loads of lads that was up there, and the atmosphere is electric,
Absolutely.
Amazing, and every single one of them has said that's the best away game for atmosphere they've ever been to.
Thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate that. Hail, hail. Now, Maverick says, I just don't get it. Let Jezza pick his team. Well, I think that's going to have to happen. And Toto De Vita says it's totally missed on Kinnock when he says Jeremy Corbyn will lose like foot. Kinnock lost twice. Double the failure. What a very good point. Alex, I'd like to thank you for spending so much time with us. Remind us again, the website, the best place to buy your book.
orbooks.com.
orbooks.com. It's called The Candidate. The author is Alex Nunns, N-U-N-N-S. It's a superb book. You've been a superb guest, and I'm very grateful to you for coming in. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows, and the good news is we've still got an hour to go, during which we'll be discussing Deutsche Bank. Don't think that's nothing to do with you, because if it goes under, it's going to be plenty to do with you.
Across the UK, online and on DAB. Access all radios.
Talk Radio. Give it some lip. Talk Radio.
It's the mother of all talk shows every Friday night from 7 o'clock till 10 with me, George Galloway, here on Talk Radio. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call. Deutsche Bank and Trump and Hillary to come after this.
Across the UK, online and on DAB.
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Listen up, comrades of the world. Unite.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio.
Get ready for a revolutionary rumble on your radio with the original George of the political jungle.
Galloway, celebrate. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? On the radio station that gives power to the people.
Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Now, how's this for a typo? My clever young men behind the glass tell me that the whole global baking system wasn't sorted out in 2008. I knew that the Great British Bake Off was becoming a bigger and bigger cake. But a global baking system collapsing? Much more of this and more on the United States too, because I want to have my say on what's happening in America. And you can have your say if you call me on 0844 499 1000.
Come have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Now, it's true that the global baking system almost collapsed in 2008. So did the banking system. And I was there. I was there in Parliament, having warned over and over and over again that the so-called light touch regulation of the British financial sector employed by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and I must point out to you, the Tories were demanding an even lighter touch regulation, meant in fact the virtual absence of regulation. Banks were falling over themselves to get business into London because they knew that it would be more loosely regulated here. The taxation system became more or less voluntary for the biggest corporations. And the whole world now knows, or perhaps doesn't know well enough, that these very same lightly regulated financial institutions brought the entire country down. There are people, millions of them, in this country that have not had a salary increase, a wage or salary increase in 8 years. A pay freeze for 8 years. Real wages in Britain are lower than they were in 2008. The longest period of negative wage growth in modern British history. Not only that, of course, but our public services have been laid waste in order to somehow balance the books, though it turned out that those doing the laying waste have tripled the level of indebtedness of the country. So much for us. We always imagine that the German economy is a model of Teutonic efficiency, muscular, robust capitalism, a kind of model which, if only we could follow, would take us out of the woods. That's before you look at the story of Deutsche Bank. It is the case that Deutsche Bank will have to be bailed out, but the government will be disinclined to bail out lesser banks than Deutsche Bank. And so, over the next 6 to 18 months, we could be looking at a banking crash in Germany, and who knows where those dominoes would fall next. Jonathan Davis is the economist and wealth manager that we regularly have here on the station. He's an outstanding analyst and a very good talker, and I'm glad to welcome him. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, George.
Tell us, explain to us what's happened with the fabled, famous Deutsche Bank.
The same that has happened to every major and indeed minor bank across the world over the last 10 years. They've got to the stage where they have so many potentially bad trades in their accounts that eventually, when one of them blows up, it blows up the whole system. The whole banking system is a massive spider's web integrated globally. A piece of history, you're talking about regulation which created 2008. I'd be interested to have a debate with you about that. But when you look back at 2008, it hit the mainstream media in September 2008 with Lehman's and AIG going bust, the biggest banking collapse in history. But 6 months before that, we had Bear Stearns in the United States, another huge investment bank, which wasn't in the mainstream media. It went bust, and the politicians and the central banks were able to paper over those cracks. Before that, a few months before that, in little United Kingdom, we had Northern Rock, which went bust. But before that, 6 months before, in early 2007, we actually had the first stage, the first step in the global banking crisis. And you know, it didn't start with some huge bank the size of Deutsche or even Lehman's. And by the way, Deutsche is 10 times the size of Lehman's. It didn't start in a major economy. It started in an economy which went bust. Its banking system went bust. It's a population of 300,000. The whole country. We're talking about Iceland. And it was the proverbial butterfly 8,000 miles away that flaps its wings. And in this case, a year and a half later, we had a Poseidon Adventure-sized tidal wave of banking collapses. And that's why I agree with you. In fact, that's what I told your producer earlier today when you invited me on. It's extremely unlikely that Deutsche will be let go bust. There are far too many powerful folk politically and financially who would have their shirts ripped off them if Deutsche went bust. But again, as I said to your producer, I think it's highly likely that over the next year or so, I mean, who can tell exactly, that there will be a little minnow bank somewhere, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, who knows, and it will be the proverbial butterfly. There's no question in my mind it's coming. The cracks in the system are widening as every single day.
What wonderful metaphors and a wonderful description for which I thank you. Let me press you on one or 2 points, if I may. One imagines, perhaps wrongly, tell us if I'm wrong, that the Germans were not quite so stupid in allowing banks to do exactly as they please in Germany as they were in the United States and in Britain. In other words, there would have been a more strict culture that the politicians would insist upon. That would appear not to be the case.
No, it's not the case. 2 points I'd like to make. One, in 2008-9, with the TARP facility in the United States, where basically they gave the banks $800 billion. I mean, it's so an unimaginable amount of money, but that's what they did. And in effect, they recapitalized the balance sheets of the banking system in the US. They didn't do it in Britain, and they haven't done it in the EU. And they're still doing it 25 years later since the initial crash in Japan in 1990. So in the US, actually, they created some relatively more health in the banking system than everywhere else. So that's the first point. The second point is the numbers are very interesting. The global economy is estimated to be around $50,000 billion per annum. The global GDP, 50 trillion. The amount of derivatives, financial derivatives in the global banking system, basically a bit like insurance contracts, is an astonishing $700,000 billion. $700 trillion, 14 times the size of the global economy. And Deutsche Bank, which to my mind is Germany, it's not the little manufacturers that make up, that all supply into Mercedes and VW Audi. That's what they want us to believe. Deutsche Bank is Germany. And Deutsche Bank's derivatives on its books are 10% of all of the global derivatives, $70 trillion, one financial institution. That's how ridiculous the Germans allowed Deutsche to get.
That is amazing, because you know much more about finance than me. I suspect I know at least as much about politics as you, and yet I would have imagined that the stolid, solid, Germanic and regimented, regulated way of doing things would have avoided that kind of exposure. Now, Deutsche Bank is too big to fail. I mean, if you're right and that Deutsche Bank is Germany, then clearly it will not be allowed to fail. Banks too big to fail, bankers too big to jail. We are familiar with that. What about lower down the batting order of German banks? Might one of these butterflies that flaps its wing be there rather than in Portugal or Ireland?
It could be. That level of detail I couldn't discuss because it's not my what I know. It could be. I think it's unlikely that it will be in Germany that the Frischer takes place, like Bear Stearns, as I say, in February of 2008, then Lehman's in September of 2008. It's more likely, to my mind, to be in the smaller, less powerful economies, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece even, goodness knows, Ireland. The politicians and the central banks, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of China, you name it, the Bank of Uncle Tom Cobley, they are literally throwing money at the banks because they know that if they let the thing bust, it will be even bigger than 2008, simply because the level of debt and derivatives, financial instruments, financial insurances in the system is a multiple of the size of where we were 8 years ago. Now, what I say to that is they should have sorted the problem out in 2008. They should have let the banks go down. They were reckless lenders. Thus, they should have been allowed to fail. That is capitalism. Those who say that we have a failure of capitalism either don't know what they're talking about or are being politically disingenuous. We don't have capitalism because in capitalism, capitalism without bankruptcy is like Catholicism without hell. In other words, what we have is corporatism, cronyism, socialism, but it is not free market capitalism.
We'll have to debate that on another night. But let me just ask you, or rather put this point to you. As you've described it, this is a high wire act that we are on, on a wire that is higher than the Empire State. It sounds to me an extraordinarily unlikely event that we're going to get across that wire without falling off. These derivatives that you talk of, they constitute a kind of thermonuclear bomb sitting there, ready to explode.
Warren Buffett, arguably the greatest investor of all time, he calls derivatives weapons of mass financial destruction. And that's exactly what they are. And the system is meant to be that if one banking institution takes one side of the insurance and another bank takes the other side, well, therefore it's in equilibrium, it's in balance and not a problem. The problem is that the balances don't happen. And they paper over the cracks. In 2008, they put Elastoplast on cancer. And they gave them painkillers. And of course what they did was kick the can down the line. I've been saying this since 2008. And they've done a remarkably good job of kicking the can down the line. Because there has not been a political will to let the thing reset. And that's the great problem. Because the more you pull that elastic band, you can pull it and stretch it and stretch it and stretch it, and then stretch it some more. But eventually it will snap back, and that is what is very likely to happen, I'm afraid to say.
Short of us all going to the southern tip of the South Island of New Zealand, what can the norm... I mean, there are 16 million people in Britain, I learned today, who have less than £100 in the bank. 16 million. They've not got much to lose, many of them. But what are people who've got something to lose? Perhaps a little bit of a bank balance, perhaps a little bit of a portfolio, perhaps a house. What can they do about the dangers they're now in?
Yep. Well, there's a number of issues there. If it's relatively small bank deposits that they have, there is a taxpayer guarantee. The first 75,000 or 150,000 in any independent financial institution will be guaranteed. In Cyprus, in 2013, you and your listeners will recall, there were bank deposit confiscations left, right, and centre. Their banking system collapsed. They had bank bail-ins, and that was the template. We're very likely going to have bank bail-ins again, but it doesn't apply to Mr. and Mrs. Average. It applies to millionaires who've got an awful lot of cash. So if you don't have an awful lot of cash, up to, say, 900,000, well, you can split that between 6 banks. That's what you absolutely must do. If you've got more than 150k as a couple in a bank, you're mad. Put it into another bank until you get down to 150k maximum in any one bank. That's the first point. Second point, in your pension, in your stocks and shares ISAs, in your investment portfolio, as you say, there are two investments which for the medium term, to my mind, are going to secure the portfolio and probably grow the portfolio. One is, strange as it may seem, lend money to the US government, buy what's called US treasuries, government bonds. In a deflationary world, government bonds rise. And over the last 3 years, those treasuries, particularly in sterling, have gone up 30 or 40%. They may pull back a short while, but if we have a recession, which we're likely to have, they'll go up through the roof. The second investment to buy is gold. Gold is in a multi-decade bull market. 15 years ago, it was $250 an ounce. It's now $1,300 an ounce. It's volatile, no question, but buy gold, put it under, dig a hole and put it in your garden, or put it in a vault in Switzerland and forget about it. Those are the two things that portfolios need to do.
Well, I suspect that almost all of my listeners will be amongst the 16 million who've got less than £100 in the bank. But if there are any who have any of these things, you've definitely given them, I'm sure, sage advice. Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager, talking about Deutsche Bank and the coming crash. Well, this is probably a good moment to break for some capitalist messages.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it?
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
Let's go straight to Brian. He's in Washington. That's Washington CD rather than Washington DC, County Durham.
Hello.
Go ahead, Brian.
Listen, George, I really enjoy your show. I've just recently found Talk Radio and I've been tuning in to your station, so I really enjoy your show.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
The thing is, George, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, right? I used to vote Labour, and I stopped voting Labour when things changed. And I don't think to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think I'll ever go back to Labour because obviously, you know, you may not agree with me politics, but last election I did actually vote for UKIP because I was unhappy about the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
So
no reason to go on doing that now, Brian.
Pardon, sorry?
Now that we've voted for Brexit, you can kind of look around a bit now, can't you?
Yeah, I might vote the Greens for a change. I've never done that before. I might vote Greens, but I'm a little bit disillusioned with Labour. I do like some of Jeremy Corbyn's policies, but there's other things which I don't agree with. If he's going to, do a turnaround on people who've left the European Union and that, it's a bit of a worry. So
no, he's not. That was Owen Smith. That was Owen Smith that wanted to have another referendum. Corbyn's accepted the result.
Yeah. You know, a lot of people don't agree with what the referendum was, but, you know, you have to look at the big picture, and a lot of people did vote in working class areas because they were unhappy in that. And I've got nothing against immigrants because we need people to come into the country who've got expertise and things like that. I don't agree that we should keep everybody out. It's just that we need to have a sensible policy, don't we? Do you think?
Yeah, but tell me what else about Corbyn's policies don't you like? You see, you're struggling. You see, you're struggling, Brian.
Absolutely. I can't imagine the railways being renationalised, to be honest with you, George.
My goodness, that's the most popular policy he's got. Virtually everybody in the country is in favour of that.
I remember very much, you know. But I don't know what they were like back then when you had British Rail. I don't know whether they were.
No,
like,
it doesn't have to be like British Rail. Although if British Rail had got the kind of subsidy the private rail operators are getting, which is 3 times as much, well, British Rail would have been a tidy affair. You've got the French railways, Brian. The French railways are run like clockwork, fantastic service, much cheaper than ours, and they are nationalised.
Oh, right. You see, I was only a youngster when that was all out, when it was British Rail. I can't remember them very well. I just remember the trains being a bit smoky and that, and a bit...
but that's because you could smoke then. Brian, thanks for your call. A great call. Lovely to hear that accent, and all accents, actually. I'm a great lover of accents, and we're getting around the country. Here's Peter in Wigan. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, hi, George. I'm actually from Liverpool, but I'm in Wigan.
Okay.
Can I beg your indulgence for a minute or two at the most?
Of course.
I today attended the funeral of a dear friend who, like you and I, supported Palestine and opposed the illegal Iraq war. George, like you, I'm an anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
With regard to the EU, I support the free movement of labour and welcome bona fide refugees. I didn't support any of the right-wing racists involved in the Brexit campaign who were clearly appealing to the anti-immigrant and racist sentiments. However, I voted to leave the EU, like I believe you did, for the following reasons. The self-serving EU gravy train that the Kinnock family and the Farages and his wife, who he couldn't find a British-born wife, who he wanted British.
Oh, here, I've got a foreign-born wife. Enough of that.
No, that's okay. And my parents were foreign. UKIP and the others have profited from the tune of millions. The massive unelected EU bureaucracy, including 10,000 officials, 5 presidents, 2 parliaments, and fleets of limousines, that, according to the EU, spent $8.4 billion in 2011 alone. Up to date, and audited accounts are not available.
They've never, Peter, their accounts have never been audited, at least in
exactly,
decades.
That's what I'm saying.
Anyway, look, Peter, I've got to take a break, so I'll need to cut you off, and you'll need to come back next week for you and I to continue that argument. Now, the best way of getting Talk Radio, wherever you are, is to download the Talk Radio app now. It's absolutely free and allows you to listen live across the country and hear the best moments of your favourite shows. From John Holmes to Eamon Holmes, Julia Hartley-Brewer to Ian Lee, and of course the mother of all talk shows. You'll be able to tune in on the move to be part of the day's agenda. Visit talkradio.co.uk for more detail on how to listen, or go to your provider's app store to download today, and make sure you don't miss a thing.
He's a weapon of mass discussion, and he's back on your radio. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
We will indeed. In fact, don't bother calling now, because I've got plenty of calls for the next half hour. Paul Register says MPs electing the shadow cabinet is a stupid idea, like letting fans vote for the coaching team at a football club. And texter Julie says, good evening, George. I was appalled by Sadiq Khan's behaviour during Jeremy Corbyn's speech. The majority of people voted for him because of Corbyn. We need you back in the Labour Party, George. Thanks, Julie. It was quite an extraordinary performance by the mayor. John Smith says, you're being too nice to Churka. He's a spineless wretch of a man. No fire in his belly. And John Clark says, I suspect the CSA inquiry scandal is so deep that by revealing the truth, it would destroy the British establishment. Now, John is in New Zealand. That's how far away they're listening to the mother of all talk shows. John, welcome.
Morning, George. How are you, mate? All right?
I'm good. It's a Scotsman too. Go ahead, John.
Aye, it's very funny. I actually mentioned New Zealand there about coming to New Zealand and have a nice life down here.
Yeah.
Impossible, mate. Never going to happen.
Why?
You've no idea. The problems I've got here. I'll give you an example. Up in Auckland, right? The average house price now is $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And the average earnings here is $70,000.
Wow.
And we've got massive problems like that, People sleeping in cars, homelessness is rife. Young folk can't get on the ladder for property. It's ridiculous.
I had no idea. And is the government still popular?
Very popular, mate. National. Unbelievable. Shocking.
Oh, that doesn't seem to make any sense.
Well, that's why I joined the Labour Party.
Is the Labour Party once governed New Zealand fairly regularly?
We did, mate.
Is it? What kind of shape is it in now?
Terrible.
Really?
We're actually down we're 26% in the polls. We've got a new guy in charge called Andrew Little. Good guy, but the problem we have in New Zealand is it's exactly the same in the UK. I mean, I watched the conference last week. Fantastic conference. All those speakers were brilliant. Diane Abbott, Corbyn, McDonnell. Even Clive Lewis, brilliant speech from him as well. Really impressed, and it's given me a bit of hope here to sort of get folk G'd up to become socialist again.
OK, John, in New Zealand, thanks for that. It's probably quite an hour in New Zealand now, and so the fact that you're listening and calling us is something to be grateful for. Let's hear from Michael, nearer home, in Easterhouse in Glasgow. Go on, Michael.
Hello, George. I'm a first-time caller, and I am a big fan of yourself. And,
thank you.
I mean, I have been quite ill recently, and I've found a great deal of solace just listening to back episodes. But what I would like to say is that I'm 42 and I've lived in Easterhouse all of my life, and not once have I voted for the Labour Party. And I would really want to vote for the Labour Party, but the problem that I have is that I find it actually quite frustrating at the moment when I hear different people speak either on the radio or television about the fortunes of the Labour Party and how their electoral downfall is through Tony Blair or the Iraq War or Jeremy Corbyn. But from my own perspective, I just think that a number of the Labour MPs, I mean, from my own point of view, are just really unhelpful and incredibly lazy, and I think that's one of the layers that the Labour Party has had in Scotland. I mean, I've written to various MPs, various councillors over the last 2-3 decades, and quite often I just don't get a reply at all.
Well, this is what happens in a one-party state, and Labour was in a one-party state, particularly in Glasgow, for a very long time. A one-party Labour state. Now we've got a one-party SNP state, and that's no better. The problem is the one-party state, not who is in power in it. I'll tell you what, Michael, I'll be in Easterhouse shortly. I'm going to show my Tony Blair film, The Killings of Tony Blair. Come along to that. I think the cinema's the Vogue. Come along to that and have a word with me. Why don't you? Thanks very much for calling. Let me take Damien, the legend, in Brighton. Go ahead, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Hi.
The reason I phoned this evening, George, was because I think on the back of the second election victory by Jeremy Corbyn, I think what this failed coup has exposed is an intellectual exhaustion of the right wing of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And I think that that exhaustion and their refusal to accept reality has led them to make some very irrational decisions. I mean, we've discussed on several occasions that the impeccable electoral success that the party's enjoyed since Jeremy Corbyn became leader. But the Rebel MPs are giving more weight to polls which are taken of a few thousand people than the literally hundreds of thousands of votes.
Yeah, well, in fact, the polls are usually hundreds of people, not thousands.
Exactly. Now, I just want to cut to the chase on this, George, because it seems to me that the key argument that the rebels have used to to justify the coup was that the public won't vote for a left-wing government. And we actually had Tony Blair himself, who's on the record as saying that he'd rather lose an election.
Yeah, he said they shouldn't vote for a left-wing government.
Right, now that puzzles me, George. And the reason it puzzles me is because I would argue that the key planks of the Labour 1997 manifesto were a left-wing proposal. The minimum wage, windfall tax on the excessive profits of private utility companies, and massive investment in education and public services. So I don't understand this. This is a paradox. They're arguing that a left-wing government can't be voted in when the Labour Party won its biggest majority and had 418 seats, which is the most seats it's ever had in its history, when it offered a left-wing prospectus. Now, what happened after that also it adds to the confusion, because as Tony Blair dragged the party to the right, the party lost 5 million votes, lost the trust of the public, lost Scotland, lost the last 2 elections. So this is, I think, goes back to the point I was saying about the intellectual exhaustion, where they're simply not making rational decisions. Now, the question going forward, which you raised at the beginning of the show, is, where do we go from here? I think what we need to do is, we've already seen Theresa May is desperately scrabbling to return to a pre-neoliberal conservatism. And I think it's time that the right wing of the Labour Party, I'm not asking them to get down on their knees and travel from town to town flagellating themselves, but I think they need to reject the neoliberal orthodoxy that they've been in a consensus with the Conservative Party, and instead need to back the leader of the party, who has outlined in some depth the exact policies which are similar in some ways to the policies that were offered in 1997, which led to a landslide victory for the party.
Well, I don't agree that they're the same as 97, but I certainly agree with the thrust of the point that you make. There is no doubt at all that the Corbyn programme is not as left-wing as Clement Attlee's programme in 1945, in which Labour was swept to power and enjoyed its best-ever government. Neither, actually, is it as left-wing as the Wilson and Callaghan programmes in 1974. Labour's programme for Britain, 1974, was way to the left of Jeremy Corbyn's. Damien, thanks for the call. Some more capitalist messages.
Listener comrades of the world, unite!
The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio. We'll get you talking.
John Smith says on Twitter, social media has killed MSM, so they won't be able to destroy you again. They and the likes of Chuka fear your honesty. Thanks for that. London Lola says there are quite a lot of us who have less than £10 in the bank. I'm not shocked by this statistic, sadly. And Wise and Simple says, yes, it's appalling. Under a Corbyn government it'll be different. Everyone will be forced to have £100 in the bank. Well, 16 million people would be grateful for that. Grant is in Alloa, and he was at the Labour conference. Let's hear from him.
Hi there, George.
Hi, go on, sir.
So, George, I was at the Labour conference, and I heard you mention Chuka a minute earlier on, but I'm going to get to him. I'm going to get to a point on him. First of all, as you all have heard, actually, the chap you had on earlier on, I kind of got into it. Now, as you'll know from probably being at Labour conferences all your life, George, if a delegate asks for a card vote, in the rule book it states you must have a card vote. Now, the chair consecutively ignored this. There's actually several people made points of orders, got on the stage, criticised the speaker. As people were putting their hands up, emotions were getting carried when it looked 50-50 splits, George.
Yeah, it was rigged. The vote was rigged.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and what even made it more kind of blatant, George, was they put all kind of 4 changes into one bundle.
Deliberately so, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you need to have control of the Conference Arrangements Committee. Yeah. That's why you have to have a big, powerful union just refuse to go on without a card vote. Big Len should have stood up there with his card in his hand and said, card vote, card vote, card vote, until they had one.
Yeah.
The left was outmanoeuvred at this conference. The situation that we've ended up with is much worse than it needed to be.
Yeah, and George, I mean, throughout that conference, I know it was kind of hyped up that the left was going to be gloating about this, but I'll tell you something, George, there was an atmosphere from the right of almost elitism within the party. I mean, these are the kind of clique-type guys who, I'll actually give you, for an instance, Ian McNichol was speaking at an event, I think it was either the Monday or the Tuesday nights, and he'd flooded the room with the kind of clique-type guys with all the suits, and they were chanting Ian McNichol 4 more years, and obviously to wind up the left speakers who were in there, because Corbyn was also there, and there's a kind of, it started off really good conference. I must say I actually had a great weekend, but there is this sense of elitism from the kind of Blairite wing of the party.
Well, they're laughing all the way to the bank. I mean, Corbyn won the leadership, but there's no point in winning the office if you don't have any power.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard situation, but I think the Scottish Labour Party needs to now act upon Ketsa Dugdale, so we can level the playing field in the NEC, George.
Well, I don't know how that's going to happen, but thanks, Grant. As always, great to hear from you. Let's see. Gary McKinnon says, business rules the world. Profit before safety. I blame Oliver Cromwell and the rise of the merchant class. My goodness, that's going back a bit. Alfred Green says, I think £100 was a generous estimate. Millions live hand to mouth. Indeed they do. Giggsy says, I've more saved in online bookies than banks. 0 interest, but can take the odd smart bet and increase the totals. Dear God. Mossy Fern says, but don't talk about that. Talk about immigration. Hope people are waking up to it now. Not sure quite what that meant, but let's go to Jim in Brighton. Go ahead, Jim.
Hello, George. Great to speak to you.
And you, sir.
Yeah, something that's always puzzled me about the entire vote with Jeremy Corbyn was, what was the justification for excluding 200,000 members? I mean, this whole thing, you couldn't vote after January the 16th or February the 16th or whatever it was. What was the explanation for doing so?
Well, the explanation was clear. They wanted to rig the outcome.
No, sure. I mean, you and I know that, but how did they legally justify it?
Well, they didn't. I'll tell you. Well, I'll let you back in, but they didn't legally justify it. They lost the first case, and their appeal, which they won in highly, I say this advisedly, highly dubious circumstances, highly questionable circumstances. They won that appeal on the basis that the rules give the National Executive Committee the right to disobey the rules, the right to change the rules whenever they like. That was the meaning of the appeal court decision. Now, that should have been appealed. I said so at the time. That should have been further appealed. But once that became the extant legal position, well, then the NEC can do absolutely anything that it likes. Now, let me explain the 240,000 figure. There's one group of people who were excluded by this point that you've just made of a cut-off date, 6 months. 6 months backdated, so that anyone who joined in that 6 months could not vote, even though the Labour Party's website said, give us your money and you can have a number of things, one of which is the right to elect a leader. It never mentioned any cut-off date, never mentioned any 6 months, and yet that money was taken and a contract was thus created, which was then broken. A second group of people, huge numbers, were suspended without any possibility of appeal before the votes were taken, suspended for retweeting the Greens, retweeting George Galloway, having been seen in a picture with somebody that the National Executive Committee didn't like, or having previously supported other parties but been won over to the Labour cause. You're out. They were suspended, they were expelled, and then there was, this is in a way, I suppose, the biggest scandal of them all. There were 75,000 people who just didn't get their vote. They weren't expelled. They weren't suspended. They didn't fall foul of the deadline date, artificially created bogus deadline date. They didn't fall foul of any of that. They just didn't get their vote. And the Labour Party's explanation was that it was an administrative error. 75,000 people. Jim, over to you.
Yeah, no, sure, and that's it. It's still baffling that they can even justify that, George, without any explanation. But just going off at a slight tangent there, I don't know if you saw the two documentaries recently, the Panorama thing and on the same night the Dispatches thing, with this absolute nonsense about the evil aspect of Momentum. I certainly know that me and my wife were sitting down watching it that night, and we have every intention of joining Momentum, because the nonsense they dragged up on that evening was embarrassing for what were meant to be journalists, the likes of John Pienaar. And it was embarrassing to see. And I certainly think in some ways that the more the media batters Jeremy Corbyn, the more your average person in the street is thinking, my God, there's something going on here. And Jeremy Corbyn is representing, us average people.
Thank God you cannot bribe or twist the average British journalist. But when you see what unbribed he'll do, you realise there's no reason to. Jim in Brighton, thanks very much indeed for your call. That's the last call that we'll be able to take this evening, because I want to talk about the United States of America. I was in Ireland this week, as I was last week, and off to Canada on Sunday and so on. And everywhere I go, people keep saying to me that, or journalists keep putting to me that I want Donald Trump to win the presidency of the United States. And I just want to make clear that that is completely untrue. I just don't want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States either. I don't want either of them to be president of the United States. Neither is a fit and proper person to have that much power, military, financial, economic, political, diplomatic power. Both of them are monsters. One of them is a cold-blooded killer, Hillary Clinton. The other is a hot-blooded lunatic. Neither of them can be trusted with the weapons of mass destruction that they have or will have in their possession. The United States has more weapons and spends more money on weapons of war and the maintenance of the sinews of war, military bases, thousands of them all over the world, has more of all of that than all of the other countries in the world put together. This is a giant behemoth, a powerful, red in tooth and claw military superpower. And it's going to be led either by a lunatic or by a cold, calculating, desiccated, calculating machine who's quite likely to use all that power for the most malignant of purposes. I would not encourage anybody to vote for either of these two killers. It's not that I'm for Trump. I just cannot possibly advise anyone, encourage anyone, or countenance anyone voting for Clinton either. So, stop saying I want Trump. I don't want Trump, and I don't want Hillary either. I'm supporting, as I have from the very beginning, Dr. Jill Stein of the United States Green Party, who not only has the best policies, better than Bernie Sanders, by the way, by quite a distance, who not only has the best policies, but is the best qualified person. She has the best policies on the domestic, on the international, on the economic, on the environmental, on the military, on the foreign policy fronts. Dr. Jill Stein is the best qualified candidate by a considerable distance. And I've met her a few times and interviewed her once. And I tell you, she's the most impressive American presidential candidate, in my mind, which goes back a long way, since Bobby Kennedy in the late 1960s in the Democratic Party presidential race. Bobby Kennedy was an inspirational, charismatic, vibrant, live wire, progressive, decent Christian man. And he was gunned down and murdered in the most mysterious of circumstances. I believe he would have made a wonderful, wonderful president. But he never got the chance for reasons which have never been fully clarified. But Dr. Jill Stein is the best candidate to run for the presidency of the United States since Bobby Kennedy, in my view. So check her out if you're listening to this in the United States, or you know people in the United States. Check her out. She's a fine woman. She'd be a credit to the United States. She would be someone who would actually make people love the United States of America rather than fear, loathe and hate it. Now, wouldn't that be a fine thing? It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time, in the same place, and bring somebody with you. I need the ratings, you see. I need to show that the audience of the mother of all talk shows is growing and growing and growing.